Probably the biggest mistake that I made, and I still see so many people making now, is using A/B testing as a way to prove how brilliant their ideas are. All of us have had this moment where we think of something that we think is really clever. What if we do this? Hey, we should A/B test that. And if we test it, I can prove just what a great idea that was. That lifted conversion by X. There's a range of issues, and I suspect it probably stems from the fact that adoption is low generally. And I think adoption is low because it takes a really particular courageous type of organization in a way to understand that they probably don't know best.
This podcast is brought to you by Bambassadors.com, the go-to platform for e-commerce brands to create video reviews that boost social proof and sales on TikTok and beyond. Get your first video review created and posted by a genuine creator, completely free, no strings attached, and no credit card required at Bambassadors.com.
Welcome to the EcomXFactor podcast, where it's all about launching and scaling your business using sales funnels, automations, and smart marketing. And now, please welcome your host, the founder of EcomXFactor, Yaron Been.
Hi, Oli. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Yaron. How are you?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to this conversation. As I told you, I didn't record a podcast for a while now, but I'm very excited for this conversation, specifically because you're a CRO and you have a lot of experience with enterprises, which is something I don't have experience with, but I'm sure that there are many takeaways from the enterprise A/B testing and CRO landscape that can be used in like small, medium businesses and solopreneurs. So I'm very curious and excited for this conversation.
Cool, me too.
Awesome. So can you share a bit about your background for the listeners?
Yeah, so I bounced around in lots of different e-commerce jobs when I finished university. Actually, straight out of uni, my first job was compiling TV guides. I did all of the TV guides in New Zealand from an office in Australia. I chose the pick of the day on every day. I would choose the best movie that was on each day and do layout. And I kind of dawdled around in the world of TV guides for about 6 months and then eventually got to London and got a job working at Amazon UK out in Slough, where I worked as a site merchandiser. And that was the period where I think it was the 16 gigabyte black iPod was far and away the best-selling product that they sold. This was about 2006. And they lost money on every single one of them, but they recouped money by cleverly selling accessories, sort of cases and things. And so I was working as a merchandiser in their consumer electronics department. So working out best ways to sell people accessories for their lost leading iPods. And really just sort of bubbled around as a contractor for many years. I managed the e-commerce arm of a ill-timed startup. This is in about 2008, I think. Guy I was working for who was actually a really brilliant guy who had been at McKinsey and raised many millions of dollars and had this pretty good idea, just a badly timed idea, to create a network of specialist magazine retailers, just as the sort of bottom was falling out of the magazine market all around the world, but was doing some really, really interesting stuff. And I took over from him running the e-commerce side of things. So working just directly with an agency and running a magazine subscription website, which was really interesting actually for a couple of years. And little by little, I discovered website optimization. Google released a product called Google Website Optimizer in around about that time, 2008, 2009. And I just started running experiments, running bad A/B tests, all the classical things that you shouldn't do, like what if we make the add to cart buttons green, and then interpreting the results to think that it was doing a lot better. We were getting a 10% conversion lift, misreading all the numbers, making all the classic mistakes, getting everyone excited for something that wasn't there. And slowly but surely, I in all of the various contract roles that I did between living between Melbourne in Australia and London in the UK, just kept pursuing A/B testing because it felt like such a magical proposition to me, this idea that you could not have to, as you know, and I know listeners know, it's really hard choosing what you're going to put on your website. It's hard to choose a strategy. It's hard to choose a price. It's hard to decide on, what your hero image is going to be, what your copy is, to say, well, let's not get too attached to any one thing. Let's try a bunch of things and see what works best. I've always felt that's the most magical proposition. And I think by virtue of just really being enchanted by that idea and, had the words A/B testing in my CV, I think in about 2012, 2013, I got a message on LinkedIn or a call from a recruiter about a job managing the optimization program at a big telco in the UK. And so I sort of fell into the big leagues by virtue of the fact that there wasn't really anyone else there as well. Mm-hmm. There was not and still is not a lot of people in this space. Mm-hmm. So I just got to keep making mistakes and learning on the job and gradually sort of understanding how to run an enterprise optimization program, which is what I've been doing ever since.
Awesome. That's a great background story. Why do you think there are not many people in the CRO landscape just yet?
I really don't know, because there's a huge demand for it. So many of my clients are just struggling to hire. I don't think they're struggling to interview. I think there's a lot of people who sort of put their hands up and say that they do have the experience and, sort of like me, have the right, like I was 10 years ago, might have the right words in their CV, but don't have the experience. I can't speak for the global market, but in Australia, it's, there's certain companies in certain sectors have been doing this for, say a decade now. Financial services, the big banks here are very good at it. They've got, I don't know if they're good at it, but they have very well-resourced teams that, rigorously A/B test landing pages to try to get you to sign up to credit cards and home loans and things, and the insurance companies as well. But it just hasn't hit critical mass. And so there's just not all of those practitioners out there. There's not an obvious pathway. It's not something you can do a degree qualification in. So there's a range of issues. And I suspect in large part, it probably stems from the fact that adoption is low generally. And I think adoption is low because it takes a really particular type of organization, I think a really courageous type of organization in a way, to understand that they probably don't know best. In so many big companies, people have this idea that, well, I've been working in when I was working in the UK, I would encounter these people who were 10, 15, 20 years older than me that had been working since the, first .com bubble, and they'd been in agencies and client side and all over the place. And they would stand authoritatively at whiteboards and have, sketch out what the site would look like. And they know definitively that everything should be above the fold. And, they have very predefined answers about what's right and what's wrong. And that's their battle-hardened, experience sort of won over many years, and they're paid very handsomely for that. But what you realize when you start testing things is that no one knows anything.
No, nobody knows.
It's just, for me, it's just an exercise in humility again and again and again. Even now, I think I know. I'm still stupid enough to think that I know. Yeah. And I don't.
Exactly. And, Socrates said this like 2,500 years ago, that I know that I don't know. This is the whole thing that Socrates said. And I agree. It takes a lot of humility, experimenting a lot and not getting your hypothesis to be right. I don't like saying failing, because you're not failing, you're just learning. But it takes a lot of humility. With regards to big brands, which have a lot of resources, so Dan Kennedy always says that the bigger they are, the dumber they get. And on the other side, they have a lot of resources. So I'm always looking like on Amazon and Uber and huge e-commerce stores, and I'm wondering if they are doing good CRO, and should I take example from them? And obviously it depends on the context, and every website is different. But what are your thoughts about the level of CRO in these enterprises?
I think Amazon they're a pretty tightly run operation, and it's hard to get an insight as to what they're doing. I know that they always have been very, very rigorous about optimization. It was only maybe circa 2004 or something when what is now Adobe Target came out, where anyone with a credit card could buy an A/B testing tool. Before that, you had to be like Amazon and build it yourself, which takes a huge amount of rigor in terms of software engineering, statistics, analysis. And I think that's, for them, it's been a core part of their culture forever. Their culture was built on this idea that no one knows, that until it's proven with data, it's an opinion. So I think at the heart of it is that culture. And I'm sure they do a very good job. As for other people, Uber and so on, I don't know. I see things anecdotally as a consumer, and I can see the impact of bad decisions that product managers are making, informed by a really short-termist view of A/B testing. For instance, every couple of months, Twitter will sort of turn on this feature where on the mobile app, I'll get a notification when I go in there. There's a bell, will have an icon in it. And I go in and I see what it is, and I don't have any new app mentions or anything like that. It's simply a prompt telling me to turn on in-app notifications, which is something I'll never do. And I get a message that says, maybe later, perhaps next time, or something like that. All I can do, and it's infuriating to me every time, and it degrades the trust that I have for Twitter as a brand. But I bet it did really well as an A/B test. It got a lot of people to turn on those notifications, lifts one metric in the short term at the expense of some really important foundational sort of, views that customers have of the brand over the long term. So, there's all sorts of people misusing A/B testing all over the place. Absolutely.
We'll dive into this, into this, why you shouldn't A/B test, especially when you have a small website a bit later. But I want to talk about, you mentioned one mistake, which is lifting one metric, short-term metric, and basically harming your long-term outcome. So sometimes people optimize for conversion rates with a very aggressive copy and a bit misleading, but on the other hand, they are harming their LTV, for example. So what are other classic mistakes that you see very, very often, whether in enterprise or small websites?
I think the key thing probably the biggest mistake that I made, and I still see so many people making now, I think it's so foundational, is using A/B testing as a way to prove how brilliant their ideas are. All of us have had this moment where we think of something that we think is really clever. What if we do this? Hey, we should A/B test that. And if we test it, I can prove just what a great idea that was. That lifted conversion by X. And it's really just plucking something out of my mind. And I think it's clever and interesting. And I become very attached to that idea. And not even 9 times out of 10, like 10 times out of 10, it fails. And the reason why it fails is because it's just something that came out of my head. I think the big thing that people don't do enough of is taking their A/B test concepts out of qualitative insight, out of literally just sitting down and talking to groups of customers. And when you talk to even just a handful of customers, there's certain themes that come out over and over and over again. And I think those are the things that should be feeding your A/B test pipeline. And you should really just be using A/B testing as a way of validating an insight that you've already found. And I think beyond the fact that you get the best ideas that way, the problem with just coming up with your own ideas and testing them again and again and again, or testing them and not seeing the results that you want, is that you can become very downhearted about it. What? That was a brilliant idea. Why does nobody like this? And you get very attached to it. And a couple of things might happen. One, you might just quietly throw it under the rug. So whatever happened to that test? Oh, no, nothing. We killed it, and that breeds this culture of actually only talking about the winners. And as you mentioned before, it's like A/B testing isn't about winning. It's about learning. And something that customers hate or, causes a strong decline in any metrics, that's just as good as something that causes a positive uplift, because it tells you that you found something that people care about. And if they care about something, then you're very close to being able to sort of turn it around with a bit of jujitsu and make it better. Oftentimes, I've had clients so a lot of my work now is working with organizations that, want to build up their own in-house optimization programs, and they're just not getting great results. They might have deployed 10 tests in a row that don't do anything. And sometimes I think that's symptomatic of the fact that they're not testing the right things, they're not prioritizing properly, and they're not going to customer research properly, to find those ideas. But also, it can tell you something interesting in that it means that customers don't care about the thing that you're testing, which can actually be really interesting. And I had this with a client a couple of years ago. We were doing all of the right things. We were doing user research, and we were validating with analytics, and we had a pretty good process, but almost no matter what we did, we failed to increase sales or decrease them as well. Mm-hmm. This is a sort of a specific situation where they within Australia, had a bit of a monopoly on price and proposition. So customers would really kind of walk over hot coals to get those products. But what we started doing, and this was my client's idea, was, all right, well, we've got all these people spending all this time doing things that we think will increase sales. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that they did is they had on all of their category landing pages, they had these sort of lifestyle banners at the top, and they would have to coordinate with the marketing teams and commission imagery. And so for clothes, it was photos of people wearing the clothes and so on. And it was a really expensive and time-consuming process because they had to ensure that all the products were in stock, and they were constantly taking them down. And it was something like 40 hours a month the team was spending on doing just this one thing, which they had never questioned, because everybody just took it for granted that if you take sort of lifestyle photos of people, good-looking people having fun using your products, that'll be good for sales, right? And then so we said, right, what if we just try not doing that? Mm-hmm. None of our other tests have had any impact. Maybe this one won't either. And sure enough, it didn't. The team got 40 hours a month back, and they could just plow that into something which was actually going to, deliver an impact.
Nice. This is a great example of sort of jujitsu, because it's not exactly A/B testing. But how many tests did it take you to realize or to come to the understanding that it doesn't really matter? I mean, it takes courage to say, okay, we can't increase or decrease the AOV or the conversion rate, so let's just try eliminating these banners. What made you come to this realization that it doesn't really matter?
I mean, it's not to say that there aren't ways for that client that they subsequently had a range of tests which have had an impact. But we just hit this patch where we just weren't getting anything. We probably had 10 tests in a row, and it's a very high traffic website. So we were able to make decisions fairly quickly about, what happens if we don't do X. And it just sort of, it's, for really large organizations, another one of the ways that they can use A/B testing is not so much increasing sales if they're not, as I say, if they represent a bit of a monopoly in price and proposition. It's not like a smaller retailer, which, I don't know, if you're selling supplements, there's a billion different places you can go and buy supplements from. So you really have to have an amazing experience, and you can get an edge on everybody else who's selling supplements. But if you're selling your own products, which you can't get anywhere else, you have them at a good price, and they're very in demand, people will really walk over coals to get them. And that can change the way that you use A/B testing as well, and use it as a way to de-risk changes. It used to be in the bad old days, every 4 to 7 years or something, people would re-platform, and they would get rid of their whole website, chuck it out, put a new one in, throw out a lot of bad, throw out a lot of good, and not know what's what. Now I've been working with one of my clients for a couple of months now, where we're just slowly swapping out components. So they've got a very old legacy platform, which is not really designed to be sort of broken down into a component level, but we're doing it. So we've swapped out the search engine first, and then tracking metrics around, product views, revenue per visitor, all that kind of stuff, and validated that, yes, the new search engine's more profitable and more user-friendly than the old. Now we're doing the checkout. Next, we'll be doing the product listing pages, then the product detail pages, and then the static content pages, until in a few months from now, we will have very slowly moved across to a completely whole new platform and ensured that it is at least on parity with the old one, and hopefully actually a little bit better. which is, for really large organizations, you may be aware of the British department store, Marks and Spencer in 2012. They spent an ungodly amount of money on a replatforming, and it went terribly wrong because they had no user research involved at all. And their share price dropped by, I don't know, I want to say 20%. But it was a lot. If you Google it now, you can still see case studies where people try to understand what went wrong. So de-risking is one of those great applications I find.
Can you cover again the steps of migration, just to clarify? Because the replatforming or migration in this case. So can you cover again the steps and why you chose this? Some of it is pretty straightforward. Why you chose this sequence, but can you elaborate about things that are not straightforward with regards to choosing this sequence?
Yeah, I don't think there was any sort of great science to it apart from search and checkout. We knew that search and checkout were the most important things. Where you the vast majority of people don't browse your categories. They treat your website like Google. And also the search on this site was particularly bad already. So we saw the greatest opportunity to make an uplift there and actually carry that for the duration of the rest of the migration. And checkout, we decided to knock off next because it is so critically important. And I think from there, it was really just in decreasing levels of importance. The PDP will be a bit visually refreshed, the PLP much the same, and content pages will be pretty similar. But yeah, we wanted to make sure that we could get it right for the search and check out early on and sort of maintain those benefits throughout the process.
Quick favor, guys. If you enjoy these shows and have been a listener for quite some time now, we would really appreciate it if you could take the time to give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever your preferred podcast app may be. Having lots of ratings and audience feedback makes our show become more visible across multiple platforms. And it also supports our mission of helping as many people as possible to become better marketers and better entrepreneurs. So if you're not driving and it wouldn't be dangerous, pause this thing right now and give us an honest review over your podcast app. And we will love you even more than we already do. Thank you for taking the time, and I hope you enjoyed the show. We talk a lot about user research and customer surveys, and basically, in your opinion, it's the foundation for A/B testing, which I really like this idea. Can you elaborate about what does user research mean to you, and do you have any specific questions that you use very often? How do you get the respondents? The whole deal of user research. Obviously, we can do like a whole course about this, but in a nutshell,
Yeah, I think I'm probably not a very good user researcher. Having worked with a handful of proper, professional user researchers, I realized just how sort of inadequate I am. I'm working with somebody right now who is sort of transitioning into user research. His background is in academia, in sociology, and what's the thing where they sort of would go to far-flung corners of the world and observe native peoples. Anyway, whatever it is, ethnography. Anyway, and psychology, and so he's got this formal academic background in studying and observing people and trying to understand user behavior, and is sort of working to parlay that into user research. And is doing so incredibly effectively. The kinds of insights that he's coming out with really divorce the things that I'm coming up with. I should say to your listeners, if anyone wants an introduction, get in touch via my details, which we'll talk about at the end of the show, and I can introduce you. But he's a great user researcher. But I find, in my experience, there shouldn't be any set questions necessarily, but really my research is focused on why people aren't buying, right? Everyone that has an e-commerce site knows that you've got, a conversion rate, which is between 1% and maybe 3% if you've got a really good conversion rate, which means that, let's say, 97% of all the people that come to your website aren't buying from you. So that's a huge audience. And one of the real game changers for me in running user research sessions has been inspired by the guy I mentioned before, who encouraged me to start using intercepts. So just putting up an intercept on the website that sort of pops up and says, hey, would you like to take part in a research study? And the reason for doing that, as opposed to what I'd done traditionally, is I would say, right, we can, in a small business, you can email databases of your old customers, but they've got what they call a survivor bias. They are the 1 to 3%.
Yeah,
they bought. They'll buy again. You don't want to know what they're doing. You want to know what that large mass of people who aren't buying are doing. So one of the big innovations for me in the last sort of few months has been running this intercept, where we just sort of pop something up on the website, have a simple little form, could have a Calendly link attached to it. You give people an inducement, depends what the product costs, but maybe it's $20, $50, $100 to talk to you. And you just get so much value out of talking to these people.
How can you share like the data? How many people do go to this, and did it create a lot of friction with regards to people actually checking out? How do you implement this? Because you're kind of deflecting them from buying.
Yeah, I think that's the case you could make for it. You are and you aren't. Sometimes you are deferring people from buying. And it depends on what the product is as well. So one of the sites that we've used this technique on is a site that sells sort of handmade artisanal belts, which have got a very high profit margin in them. So they cost a couple of $100, and I think we're offering a $100 voucher for them. So even if somebody buys using that voucher, if that prompts them, what is the heuristic that when somebody sort of thinks they have something, having a 100% voucher, it's like, I'm pretty close to getting this $200 belt. For that site, having even a sale with the voucher is still profitable. But I think ultimately it's day in, day out that 97% of people aren't buying. So you could make the case to say, well, perhaps we're sort of, prompting people not to buy and we're getting in the way. But do you want to know why people aren't buying or not?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. It's better to do so now, optimize, and then stop, and then getting better results, like taking the slight hit now and optimizing. I used to put like a quick form in as an exit intent pop-up for buyers only on desktop, because in mobile the exit intent pop-up for me never worked in my website. So I just asked them, was it a sizing issue, pricing issue, not sure about anything, and then they would submit and also send their email, and then we could segment and also try to convince them based on their objections. So this was a nice way that we kind of did a user research, but it doesn't give you a lot of insight. It just gives you like a segmentation, and you understand what kind of vertical you need to improve in your funnel. What do you ask in the calls when you hop on a call with them? What do you ask, except for why aren't you buying?
It very much depends. We've been doing some research recently for a wine shop based in London. They're sort of one of the big retailers of natural wine in East London, and they are, like so many businesses over the last 2 years, was sort of dragged online. They set up they'd had a Shopify store for a couple of years. They didn't really care about it. But then suddenly in the pandemic, all of their business was transferred online, and they began to see the potential of it. And a lot of those questions have really been, what we're trying to discover is why you're visiting the site and not buying, but then really trying to uncover usability issues and, behavioral, attitudinal things that might arise out of that. So one of the things that we discovered, for instance, in that case was many of those people were visiting the site and not buying because they're just wine fanatics and they love it and they love looking at the products, and they will probably buy in store. But then, once we saw that opportunity, sort of took that opportunity to pivot the research to say, well, what would get you coming back more, and what would sort of, help pull the trigger on getting you to buy online, because often they might live, across the other side of town. That's not practical to come in, so on. So I would say it changes every time, and it's always iterative. The more you learn, the more you are able to refine your focus, in my experience.
Yeah, the quote, the more you learn, the more you earn.
Yeah,
so basically, do you incentivize the respondents, or do you compensate them?
Yeah, always. And try to do it quite well too. I want to make it worth their time. So in this case, I think they were given a £50 voucher to spend on wine at the store. So it doesn't cost £50, of course, because they're spending it at their store. And so I think that there's an opportunity there. If you're taking people that have not bought from you before, you can turn them from somebody who's never bought from you into somebody who understands a bit more about you and what you're trying to do. And also, once they've got the voucher, they'll spend it, and now they're a customer. They might be on your email list. So there's a small opportunity there as well. But I also think it's an involved process. It's 45 minutes to an hour sitting in front of Zoom, doing tasks. We really don't want to give anyone an excuse to not take it seriously, because otherwise this is just a waste of time.
So who would be sitting in this meeting? You and someone from from the customer support team, customer success, the COO. Who would you normally would want to be in the meeting?
So depends on the business. In most cases, when I'm working with smaller e-commerce businesses, it will be either a user researcher who will be conducting the sessions, organizing with the participants and so on. They will conduct everything over Zoom. They'll record the sessions if anyone wants to view them. But then they have the tremendous task actually of drawing the insights out of that and working out how to present them in a way that ensures that the business will act on them, essentially. So in most cases, I don't expect that anyone would actually, watch the individual research sessions so much as they would be bundled up in aggregate. That said, many years ago, when I was working at the Telegraph, the newspaper in the UK, they had an amazing product and UX team there. Everyone worked on, and this was building what I think is still a really very good news website at telegraph.co.uk. We were working on that replatforming for what is live currently, and everything worked on very short sprints. It was 1 week long sprints, and it all culminated in what was called Testing Tuesday. And so they would have a single user researcher in a meeting room, with an iPad or a laptop or something and a camera, and then buried under the false floor in that meeting room, which would be completely blacked out, to about 3 or 4 meeting rooms over, the whole team of, product designers, UXers, customer researchers, me, whoever would be in there, actually watching developers, watching live what was happening, taking notes, and then using that to feed into the next iteration of the product cycle. So what started out with real facepalm moments in week 1 sort of got slightly less palmy as facepalmy over weeks 2, 3, 4, which can be just a brilliant way to develop a product.
Awesome. It's very interesting. I want to go back for a moment and ask you, I'm curious to know what made the guy from the academia, what made his research so significantly better? Can you pinpoint?
Sorry, the guy from academia? Well, yeah, what's made his I think he puts less of himself in it. I think it may be his training. It might simply be his inclination. I'm a bit of a loudmouth, and I have a lot of opinions about things. And I think probably it's hard for me to resist foisting my opinions onto participants and perhaps swaying the way that research happens. I think to be a really good user researcher, you have to be very patient and really gentle with people and just watch them and see what sort of patterns emerge. And I think it's a very particular skill set. And I can fake it, but I'm certainly not among the best.
Do you remember any insights that he was able to mine that really blew your mind?
we actually haven't presented this work to the client yet, so I maybe shouldn't say too much about it. But one of the things that we found that was particularly interesting in this case was, in the world of wine these days, I guess like many things, subscriptions are a big thing. Particularly in the natural wine space in Australia now, there is, every week or two I'll see a new billboard, an actual physical billboard somewhere that's trying to sell me a new trendy natural wine subscription. Very, very big thing. Now, my client has really deliberately not gone down that path because they don't see it as being their focus particularly. They put that one of the things that differentiates them as a store is that they don't stock a lot of things. They don't stock things that will make them money necessarily. They could sell a lot of things that they don't love or believe in and make a lot of money. But instead, it's a very tightly curated shop of things that they really love. Yeah. And one of the things that we noticed in the research was this simply wasn't coming out. Customers didn't quite understand that. But as that relates to subscriptions, they did have sort of mixed packs. So people would curate different packs of wine on the website. One of the things we came to understand is that people distrust those and they think that's getting rid of dodgy bottles, which absolutely isn't. These are painstakingly put together packs, but implicitly they trust subscriptions, which is just a behavior that I never would have anticipated at all.
This is very interesting. Very interesting. I need to digest this. But I want to talk, in a moment, I want to speak about prioritization, because after the user research, you get the insights and now you want to start implementing changes. But before we speak about the prioritization, I wanted to ask you, what is the importance of the team when you start working with an enterprise or even with a e-com small store owner? Do you ask their opinion? Do you ask them about any intuitions they have with regards to the customer's preferences, stuff like that, or you just completely ignore their intuition?
I don't know that I ignore their intuition. When people reach out to a consultant or an agency, they have an idea as to what their problem is, and sometimes what their problem is what they think it is, but very rarely. Normally, exactly. it's something else entirely. So for any new client that I take on, I do a what I call a quantitative review, which is it's a big diagnostic. So I've got a series of structured questions. I do a sort of 1 hour long interview where I go through a bunch of structured questions around what they do, what they've done before, their processes, their teams, their business history, all that kind of stuff. And I try to really understand their business inside out, often having follow-up sessions with sort of different people on the team. And then I'll go away and try and map that to what I can see in their analytics. And I don't necessarily do any user research at this stage, but just try and get a sense as to what you've told me about your business versus what I can see in analytics. And for me, that turns up a lot of focus points around blockages. Where is traffic coming from? Where is profitable traffic coming from? What's happening in your checkout? So no, I don't take anything at face value. I pull it all apart and then present that back to the client. And sometimes we do more work together. Sometimes we don't. But oftentimes that will give them a lot to think about. Certainly.
Do you see a lot of discrepancies between what the client's states are the issues and what the data shows? Like the Google Analytics, do they look at the Google Analytics often? Are they aware of what's going on?
Yeah, I find that people do. The biggest issue I see with analytics, though, is that it's just sort of malformed and not tracking correctly. People will have these hodgepodge analytics implementations that they might have put on 5 years ago when they first built their website and their web developer put it on and it's free and you don't really think that much about it. And then over the years, people have added tracking here and there, but it's never really centralized and coordinated. So often things that people think are being tracked and not, or they're being tracked incorrectly. So it can be really broken. But I think the key thing is people so rarely think to actually make a measurement plan which maps their business objectives to their analytics. You might care about email signups. Are you tracking that? Are you tracking that in your analytics? How can you know that, of course you care about purchases and so on in e-commerce, but people just don't go through that simple exercise about thinking on the page, what's our primary goal? What's our secondary goal? What's our tertiary goal? And ensuring that they can measure those things effectively so that they can optimize for them.
Let's just cover the prioritization, because I read your blog post. I told you I loved your website design and the content that you have over there, and definitely suggest everybody checks out your website afterwards, and we will drop a link in the show notes. But can you speak briefly about the PI method? Is it a name that you came up with, or?
No, PI is not. Yeah, that's a blog post I wrote a couple of years ago now. I think it's called PI. PI sucks, but it's the PI prioritization method sucks, but it's the best thing that we have. The reason, I guess, PI was developed by Chris Goward, who's one of those people who's been in A/B testing for a long time. It started a company called Wider Funnel, back in the 2000s, and he proposed this idea for the PI prioritization framework back in 2011, and basically, it is potential. So how much improvement can be made? How important is the thing that you're testing? So he defines it as how valuable is the traffic to the pages, and ease. So how complicated is it to implement the test? And I've learned along the way that should include not just technically, but also sort of cultural barriers that you might encounter as well, because sometimes they can be bigger. And then you basically you add a score, you add them up out of 10, and then you take an average of them. So yeah, Chris proposed this back in 2011 and on the Wider Funnel blog. And there's a quote from my initials, OCP, from 6 years ago, and it said, "Isn't the PI score just an aggregation of a few guesstimates turned into a number out of 10? So this is me calling bullshit on the PI score initially. And he responded to that really thoughtfully, and he said, and I quote, he said, "As with many good strategic frameworks, it's a mix of objective and subjective measures. If it was all just data that could be pulled from an analytics report, we wouldn't need talented strategists to do it. We could just write an algorithm, but it's not this simple."
Nice.
And in the last couple of years, every man and his dog has tried to come up with a proprietary prioritization method. There's growth hackers have ICE, which is basically the same thing. CXL have got their own one, which they call PXL, which is about 20 different scoring points. And most people seem to love that one, actually. When I posted this on LinkedIn, everyone was like, "What are you talking about? PXL is the best," but I don't see it. PI for me is it's so beautifully and utterly simple. It's just, what do we want to do? How important is it? How hard is it to do it? And it provides you with a framework for having those really good conversations, because ultimately, optimization is not just about the single test. It's really about getting cultural buy-in, getting people to come along for the ride and to care about what you're doing and learn from it, and little by little create this culture of optimization and experimentation. And I think PI not only allows you to facilitate those conversations and make sure that you are picking something that everyone certainly thinks is going to be, the easiest thing to do, that's going to have the biggest value, but it also really gets that buy-in and gets everyone involved, which I think is a great flow-on effect.
Can you elaborate for a second? What is the difference between potential and importance? I'm not sure I see the difference.
Yeah, it's a very good point that you make. I don't get it either. It is potential and importance. So
if it's important, it has potential, and vice versa. I mean,
so in the post, I talk about what I use, which is, I call it modified PI. So I actually make the P priority. And so my version of PI is priority, I think impact and ease. I might use them interchangeably. But priority is interesting because it tells us how does this fit in with our overarching business objectives, which particularly working at enterprise, people might say, all right, we need an extra 1 million email signups this quarter. And that's when everyone's going to focus on that rather than sales, for instance. So priority allows us to put that lens of, how does it fit in with everything else we want to achieve? And then we can look at how easy it is to do and what we think the impact will be.
Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe changing it to PUE, like potential, urgency, and effort, because priority is kind of like urgency. Maybe we came up with something.
I think the last thing the world needs right now is another riff on Palmer Yaron.
Awesome. Cool. Wow, we covered a lot. I actually wanted to cover a few more questions, but I think we can leave it for a follow-up episode if you're up to it.
Sure, that sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Oli. Where can people find out more about you, connect?
On my website, it's oliverpalmer.com, Palmer, and that's there's a mailing list there, and you can get me on LinkedIn and Twitter and occasional blog posts and stuff too.
Awesome. Cool. Great. Thank you so much again. Have a lovely evening and keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Take care. Hi guys, this is Yaron again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number 1, if you want to learn more about e-commerce and marketing, make sure you check out our YouTube channel, which is called EcomXFactor Official. Number 2, check out our Facebook group, which is called EcomXFactor Marketing and E-commerce Mastermind. This is a great place to ask questions and connect with other business owners. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to share it with your friends and colleagues, plus leave a review at your favorite podcast app.